Hi, my name is Chris, and this is Light Inspiration. So I wanted to shoot a quick video about a recent part replacement that I had to do for my Prusa MK3. I was running into an issue where the extruder was crashing into the bed and it couldn't recognize where home was, and went through and troubleshot and asked people on the forums and contacted Prusa Support, and in the end ended up being that the issue was the Pinda probe that is used by the extruder to figure out where, like, how close it is to the bed, using the inductive sensing. So the process of figuring it out, I documented in a couple of videos over on my Vimeo channel. At one point, I was just trying to show that the extruder was crashing into the bed, and then in another video, I'm actually showing how it seems like it's the Pinda specifically that is crashing into the bed. So before I went through the process of actually replacing the probe, I read through the assembly manual over again to figure out the steps I would need to do to take apart as little as possible to replace just the probe and not disassemble the whole extruder. I also looked online for videos of people who have replaced the Pinda probe before on the MK3 to see if there were any little gotchas to keep an eye out for, or just to see another person's approach to replacing the part. And I actually couldn't find any. I couldn't find any videos on it. I didn't search too hard for text-based instructions, just because, one, I have text-based instructions which in the assembly manual, and two, there's something about seeing a video of someone replacing a part or doing a process that can tease out little details a little bit better than just text explanation. So when I was replacing the probe on this, I shot a couple of videos so that I could put it out there, and hopefully it will help someone else if they have to replace a probe, or maybe they have to replace a different part in the extruder, or they just want to see someone's process of going through and being careful and replacing part on the printers or anything. So basically, okay, so I was crashing into the bed. We saw the videos. I contacted Prusa Support, and they had me run, after explaining what was going on, they had me run a calibration test so we could try to narrow down the issue to the Pinda, or likely the Pinda. So the test that they had me run was actually under the calibration menu. And if we scroll towards the bottom, the test that they had me run was the show in stops test. So when you switch this, it shows each of the axes, and the z-axis is the one that we were worried about. Whenever the Pinda sensor thinks it's close to home, that value should change to 0. And because this is an inductive sensor, I should be able to put a piece of metal underneath it and get the value to change to 0. And as you can see, it does not. There's also a physical indication that it's not showing. There's an LED on the very top of the sensor that whenever it's whenever it's checking to see if it's close to home or close to the bed, the LED turns off. Normally it's on, and as it finds the magnetic match in the induction, the LED turns off. The LED on this one does not turn on or off at all. So I've got the new Pinda that Prusa sent me, and I'm going to turn off the printer and unplug it, and I'll plug the new one in and show that response. Okay, so we have the new Pinda plugged in. I will go ahead and plug the printer back in and turn it on, and we'll run that same calibration test that we did before and see the difference. So I'll jump into calibration and go down to the show end stops, and now whenever I pick up the Pinda sensor, as you can see, the LED is on because we're trying to see if we're close to the bed. And if I take a metal object and get close, you'll see that the LED turns off and on. And you'll also see on the screen down here the value change from 0 to 1. And if we do it on the bed, as we get close to the bed, we can see the Pinda is turning off and on. So now even though we didn't know for sure that it was the Pinda, it could have been the Pinda, it could have been the Rambo board, but after getting a known good part and testing it, we could conclude that this Pinda is definitely bad. So the next step is going to be replacing it with the new one. So before I jumped to the printer to start replacing the part, I first came to the Prusa website and looked up the assembly instructions. I still have the physical book, but the assembly instructions on the website are absolutely fantastic, plus they get constant updates. I didn't really think I needed an update, but I thought I'd go here anyway. I scrolled through the guide until in the section on the E-axis assembly until I got to the Pinda probe sensor portion, starting to familiarize myself and plan on how I was going to take this part off, and going through and seeing how little of the extruder I could actually disassemble before I actually went down and started unscrewing things. So, and I think the one thing that's going to keep me from actually being able to do this without taking off the entire thing is this hook right here. That hook, the Pinda cable goes under. And when you look a little bit further in the assembly instructions, that hook that the Pinda sensor is going through is butts up to the mounting section for the cartridge itself. So it looks like I'm going to have to, at the very least, take the cartridge off. There is a chance I may be able to take just the back off and slip the wire through, but I'm not totally hopeful. So I think that I will need to plan to take the entire assembly off of the rails, remove the cable, and then put it back through. Okay, so I moved the entire printer out to my workbench. Everything is unplugged, and I've got my assembly instructions over here to refer back to as we go through it. I did most of the research on the website, but when I bought this, I bought it as the kit, so I got this fantastic manual of assembly instructions, which is really just a paper version of what we were looking at on the website. And I'm going to have this out so I can refer back to it, and also because I'm capturing video on my computer, so it's accessible. But yeah, so let's turn around and start talking about what's going to need to happen. So after reviewing these instructions and thinking through the process of taking the extruder off with as little disassembly as possible, I feel like we're going to have to, well, we need to take the entire extruder off of the Z-axis so that we can get better access to these wire wrappings and the cable cover, but also because the Pinda sensor loops through that little hook on the extruder body, and we can't get to it without taking a couple of the parts apart. So I'm going to go ahead and start disassembling this, and I'll stop if I run into parts of the disassembly that it seems like it would be good to call out. So I'm trying to get the shot in as close as I can without disturbing too much of the workspace. But basically, I unscrewed and pulled away the back cover for the extruder. I left the screws as screwed in just a little bit so that I don't have to manage the different screws. If I don't have to, I could just leave those with the part, and then whenever I'm done, I can put it back on. So now we have access to all of the different cables, and this is the part where this is a part where I feel like where I feel like we need to take the entire extruder off, and I know it's probably going to be hard to see from this angle, but basically I have access to the entire Pinda cable right here, but there's because of that little hook, I can't actually just go ahead and pull the whole thing out, so I'm going to have to at the very least dislodge the front portion of it so I could get past the hook, and I'm going to have to, it seems like there may be a chance I could like dislodge it, work the wire for the old Pinda sensor out, and then slip the new Pinda sensor in, and place the Pinda cable in place. The thing that I just want to make sure that I don't do is to like damage the new Pinda cable at all. But ideally, if I could keep the whole extruder on and just switch the cable out, then all I would have to do is worry about like running it through the parts, and then like unwrapping and rewrapping the cable covers. So that would be ideal if I could do that. If not, I'll just pull the whole thing off. So if you're looking along at the manual as you go through this, it looks like this step 26, at least in the version of the manual that I have, these three mounting screws are what attaches the extruder body to the guide on the x-axis rail. So I think that if I unscrew these three, I should be able to, or at least loosen them, I should be able to get the cable out and put the new cable in. We'll see. Okay, so it looks like I am it looks like I am able to get the cable out. I actually have it out from under the hook. I need to one of the things I forgot to do is there's a little set screw, or a little screw, not a set screw. There's a screw for holding the pressure clamp for the pin in place, and I need to unscrew that. These screws are already a little bit loose, so I'm going to hold the extruder in place while I do the part that I forgot to do. So something that I just had to do, which made me really nervous, is the pressure clamp that's holding the body of the Pinda sensor or the Pinda probe into place. The pressure clamp was too tight for the threading. Like I could feel it turn whenever I was unscrewing it, but it was so tight that I couldn't just slip it in and out like the assembly instructions said. So I had to go through and use a flathead screwdriver, one of the assembly screwdrivers, to very, very lightly relieve the pressure a little bit more from the clip. If you do this, and be very, very careful, because that obviously is a 3D printed part, and it's only going to have so much give before it breaks. So it made me nervous doing it. So if you have to do that, be careful. So, but it looks like now I can run the old Pinda wire out, and I've got it out of this assembly. So from here, where we're at now, the old Pinda's out, the new Pinda's in, or needs to go in. The cables need to wrap under the correct sections of the extruder, and the entire extruder body needs to be secured back to the rail. These are just loosened up so that I could work out the cable, and then and then the new Pinda wiring needs to go through the wrapping. I think I'm going to tackle this in two parts. I think I'm going to get this part all back together and secure again with the new cable draped out to the side, and then I'm going to work on pulling out the old cable from the cable wrapping. I guess three parts: pull the old cable out of the cable wrapping, and then put the new one. So hopefully I could do all this in place, or as close to in place as I possibly can. All right, so now I think one thing I will do before I start securing the cartridge back is get the old Pinda sensor completely out. Okay, so now I should be able to take the new sensor and start threading it through. So I'm going to try and be way more careful with this one than with the old broken one, because I don't want to damage this one. So this portion of running the cable is a little bit backwards. Normally the Pinda's already mounted and you're moving the back section through, which has a larger head, which would fit, still fits fine through the hole, or at least it should according to the instructions. But we kind of luck out in this case because it's a smaller object that we're passing through next to all the cables. So let me go ahead and do that now. Okay, so I've got through the back of the cover, and one of the things that the instructions remind you is to remember to run it on the correct side of the extruder body, which seems fairly obvious, especially once it's all assembled, but it is good to make sure you take care to put it on the correct side of the extruder, and then also to make sure that it runs under the belt drive, or the belts for the drive. Okay, so now I've got the fan wire and the Pinda cable running through the slot on the side and under the hook. So now I should be able to pull some of the slack just a little bit and then slip it into the pressure clamp. So something to keep in mind in step 24 of the assembly manual, you run the Pinda sensor through the hook, and then you want to create the loop going through. Excuse me. You want to create a loop before it goes through the hook. So that you can get the wire under the clip. And this, after whenever I first did, I was kind of just following the instructions because that's what they were telling me to do. After fully assembling the kit, it's like I feel like this is done so that if you have to move the Pinda up and down, you have a whole bunch of slack, so you're not potentially straining the cable going through the hook. That will eventually be kind of a little bit tighter going through the slots and stuff like that. So just remember to create that same loop. Okay, so now that the cable, the new cable is in place, I'll go ahead and tighten the screws. Double check to make sure that there wasn't a specific order. Let's see. Okay, so there's not a specific order in tightening the screws. It says to tighten the screws, but not fully, because we need to arrange the cables first. The cables are already arranged. I'll go ahead and lightly tighten them, double check all the cables, and then go ahead and move forward. Okay, so now let's double check all the cables. So these are running through fine. These look like they're still running through correctly. Those are running through the cartridge, and filament sensor is still plugged in, so I think we're good. So I'll go ahead and tighten them all down. Okay, so got that back on. And the new Pinda sensor is already running through the back, so I'll go ahead and reattach the back. So another part to note in the instructions on step 32, connecting the filament sensor. So the filament sensor never disconnected, but running it through the little channel that from the front of the extruder body to the back cover. There are a couple of notes on there about doing it carefully, so be sure to pay attention to those as well. Okay, so we are getting to the part where we're putting the extruder back on. The one of the things to note in step 35 is that the whenever you're attaching this filament sensor or god when in step 35, the thing to note is that whenever you're screwing in all of the screws for the back cover, order does matter, in the sense that we want to screw in the middle one first so that we get proper alignment, and then we want to screw in the outer ones. So so make sure you do that in the correct order. So I'm pausing temporarily and going through and double checking. I don't know if you could see from this angle, but at the bottom of where the back cover meets the extruder body, there's a gap where it's going over the bearing, and it doesn't seem like that gap should be there. So I'm gonna stop, pull it apart a little bit, and check and see what's going on. Okay, so I'm actually glad that I stopped to double check. So I'm not sure if I'm gonna be able to get a really great shot of this. I'll get as close as I can. But basically, what was happening was the where if I pull the back cover away a little bit, the bearing that we use to on the bottom rail to slide back and forth wasn't completely aligned with the extruder body, so it was sitting off of it just by a little bit. And once I loosened the back and moved it a bit, the weight of the extruder actually pushed forward so that it sat better on that bearing. So that must have been what the issue is. So definitely a good note if you're having to go through either this Pinda replacement or any of these other cover replacements after the printer is fully assembled. Make sure that whenever you're putting the extruder back on, that bearing is censored so that you don't end up clamping them and putting more pressure on it where it doesn't need to be. Okay, yeah, and if you can see from this angle, there's a noticeable gap whenever I was starting to screw these bottom screws in. There was a noticeable gap right there of probably um like a like a centimeter or so, maybe less than a centimeter. But either way, there's a noticeable gap there. After making sure that that bearing was lined up, there's no gap whatsoever, and I haven't even tightened in anything other than the center screw. So glad I caught that. Okay, so the next step on getting this back together is whenever I was pulling the wire wrapping off, these nylon filament that kind of gives the all the cables here a little bit of a rigid spine to run across came out of the hole. So I'm gonna go through and put the nylon cable back into the slot, make sure that that's okay. Okay, so now I've got all the cables back in place. I've got the nylon filament plugged back in pretty sturdily. So I'm gonna go through and rewrap the cable wrap. Actually, no, I can't rewrap the cable wrap because I need to undo the rest of the cable so I can run the new Pinda cable through and then wrap it all back up. So let me go ahead and do that now. Okay, spiral wrap is off. So I'll go ahead and pull out the old Pinda sensor. Now from here, it'll just be getting all the new stuff in. So something I should point out, the pictures in this assembly, the physical assembly manual are fantastic, but there are certain details, especially whenever you're dealing with the black printed parts and the black cable wrap and stuff like that, where the pictures are they're clear here, but it's good to check the web, or it's nice to have the manual on the website as well, because the pictures are so much sharper on the computer monitor. So the portion where they're talking about which cables to wrap first, it wasn't like there was part of it that didn't look completely clear. I checked it on the computer. It was just like, oh yes, that makes sense. So yeah, I'm gonna keep going. So I ran into issues where the nylon spine came dislodged whenever I was trying to wrap the cables, and I think that was because the fact that it was already in place in the electronics box was causing it to wiggle. Was causing it to wiggle just a little bit. So I popped the entire thing out, and then I'll just assemble it as I'm wrapping the cable. So I'm gonna put it back in place now. Okay, and remember the instructions say to wrap the top cables, so all the cables going through the cover back first. Wrap those 3 times, and then start wrapping the other cables in. Remember, the instructions say to go through and wrap the top cables and the cable wrap, going winding around 3 times, um, and to try to press it slightly into the extruder back. Now we're going to go through and use some of the zip ties. Thank goodness they provide so many extra ones, so I don't have to run out and grab them. We're going to use the zip ties to attach the cable wraps to the little mounting part. So this is another place too, that may be better to double check the website, versus the paper manual. There's a there's a very important note on paying attention to the final position of the zip ties, so that you don't end up with printing issues. And the black zip ties against the black, cable wrap against the black, printed pieces are a little bit hard to see on here, but I know from reviewing the website yesterday that this image is super crisp. So I'm gonna double check because I want to pay great attention. So the part that the manual is talking about paying close attention to is the final position of the zip ties, specifically head. So if you review the manual, the zip tie head that's closest to the extruder itself should be down. The other two should end up towards the top of the cable wrapping. All right, so now I'm going to continue this spiral wrap. So you get one more turn in on the top cables, and then we'll start wrapping them all together. Okay, so okay, now we're jumping up ahead a bunch into the electronics assembly over on step 27. All the other stuff is already done and assembled, so so we want to make sure that the cable wrap is, we're shooting the nylon out before we finish wrapping the cable, and there's some of it that's still a little bit loose. And then now we're gonna go through, make sure that the nylon filament is pressed in, and then get the rest of the cable wrap going through the opening of the top of the electronics. All right, so now that all the cables are running back through, I should be able to plug the new Pinda sensor in, and really, from here, I think I'm done. So I'm gonna, before I go through and button everything up and clean up the cables and stuff like that, I'm going to flip the printer around and give it a test run. Let me double check to make sure that nothing looks crazy. Okay, that looks good. Yeah, go ahead and plug the printer in and give that part a check. All right, so the printer's plugged back in. I'm gonna go ahead and do the show end stops check that I went through with Prusa Support. So calibrations, show end stops, and so we got our 0 on the Z. And if we take something metal and put it close to the new Pinda, we'll see now that value. Hopefully you can see it from there. Now that value is changing from 0 to 1. So new sensor is in place and working. So the rest of it is just doing the rest of the pre-flight check, and we should be back up and printing pretty soon. Okay, so after going through and doing the pre-flight checks and the calibration and stuff like that, I went through, did a couple of test prints. I did some of the Z alignment calibration. I feel like I didn't need to shoot video of all that, and then I started this batch print that I wanted to let run overnight, and it looks like we are back up and printing well. So there's probably a little bit more Z calibration that I need to do, just because I've done this batch before and I know that bulge at the bottom shouldn't be quite as pronounced. But really the Pinda has nothing to do with the process now. But it's great to, one, see it printing again, and two, to see the little red indicator light on the Pinda the way it should be. So we are back at 100%. So that's it. The printer's back up and running. I just need to. I'm going through and cleaning out the enclosure, my printing enclosure here that I usually have the printer set up in before I go through and put the printer back in place. But that's it. I'm back to printing. I printed out a test part and it looks really good. So I am happy. So hopefully that helped you out, and hopefully it provides some light inspiration.